We started a new sermon series on Sunday called Resilient. Here are the Discovery Bible Study bookmarks for the series. You'll see the sermon titles and the primary biblical text on the front, and then on the back, the Discovery Bible Study questions. A great way to track with the sermon series and also use it for personal Bible study along with the series, or to sit down with other people, family, friends, neighbors, and study the scriptures together, and maybe invite friends and neighbors to come to worship with you, and so they can hear the sermons, and then you can follow up with the Bible study with them. So a great resource. I would encourage you to pick one of those up. Now, for this series we're calling Resilient, we're using the image and the idea of something called shosugi-ban. It is an ancient Japanese technique used to weather wood. It's been around for a long time, and so they use fire to burn wood to different degrees of char. Now, obviously, they don't use something like this. They use probably a blowtorch or an industrial blowtorch, but they burn the wood and really char it. It turns black and begins to crack. But what happens is this transformation takes place in the wood, on the surface of the wood. And so a protective coating is formed on the wood that protects it from conditions and bugs and weather. In many ways, that fire is what transforms the wood and makes it last longer. There are buildings that have been around for hundreds of years that have this technique done to the wood on the building. And it seemed like a very fitting image for this series called Resilient, because sometimes there are fires in life. Sometimes there are setbacks and struggles. There are difficulties. There are challenges. Sometimes they are because we make poor decisions. We put ourselves in bad situations, or other people around us make bad decisions. Sometimes it's just because there are negative circumstances. We live in a broken world, a fallen world, and so there is sickness, and there is sin, and there is struggle. How do we respond to those things? How do we respond to those fires? Do we allow those things to destroy us and destroy our faith? Or do we allow them to refine our faith, to make us stronger? Do we allow God to transform us so that we can persevere and sustain the fires of life? In the message on Sunday, we talked about Job. Job lost everything. Read chapters 1 and maybe chapter 2 of Job and see all that he lost and see how he responded. And think about how you might respond if you were Job. After chapters 1 and 2, we have several chapters of Job having conversations with his wife, with his so-called friends, and most of all with God. And throughout these poetic conversations, you see the tension, you feel the struggle that Job has. Yes, at the very end of chapter 1, he bows down and worships God, the one who gives and takes away. But then you see 40 more chapters of Job wrestling with God, struggling to fit pain and suffering into his theology. I think we all do that. We can relate. If you've been through any kind of suffering or loss, difficult time, you know how difficult it is to understand suffering. And we ask the same question that Job asked time and time again of God, and that's the question, why? Why have you targeted me? That's what Job says. Why is this happening? What is the purpose in this? We often ask those questions as well. And as you go through Job, what you will find is God doesn't really answer Job's why questions. Often he doesn't answer our why questions. When we go through difficult times, when we experience suffering, we don't always understand the reason behind it. What's the purpose? What's the why? We don't always get that answer. But God gives us something better, and God gave Job something better than answers. He gives us himself, his presence, his comfort. And so read chapter 42 of Job, especially the first few verses, and see Job's response once he gains perspective. Having these conversations, this back and forth with God, opens his eyes and gives him perspective. And I want you to see what he says, not only to God, but about God, and how that begins to frame his suffering. His faith is not destroyed. He leans into his faith, and he looks to God and his faith is refined. We said in the message, when you go through difficult times, when your world collapses, don't necessarily look for answers, look for God. Think about that. What does that look like in real life, in real suffering, in your life, in the lives of your friends or family? Where have you seen that? When you don't get those answers, but you just get God, and that's enough. And it humbles you, and you realize that God is in control, and that God is sovereign, and then our response simply becomes to trust him, no matter what, to trust God. As we said in the message, trust is the way through despair. Trust is the path that gets you through suffering, learning to trust God. And that will bring about a resilient faith in you, because God will work to transform you, because you seek God and pursue God, and you see God. Like Job said, he said, my ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. And when you experience God, when you see God, you have no other response but to bow down and worship like Job did, and to trust him. Trust is the way through despair.